mental reps, the film, the walking through to live action. And, everybody learns in a different way. Everybody absorbs information in a different.
The check had already been posted when Caitlin Clark's phone rang with a call that would pierce her heart and set in motion a revelation so profound it would forever redefine her understanding of gratitude, destiny, and the cyclical grace of giving back. The voice on the line trembled with urgency. Her foundation's director, Sarah Martinez, explaining that the West Des Moines Community Food Pantry was on the brink of closure, 3 months behind on rent, its shelves thinning, its future uncertain. Hundreds of families, Sarah explained, were about to lose their primary source of nourishment and dignity. Caitlin stopped mid-step along the familiar tree-lined streets of her hometown, the crisp Iowa wind biting against her cheeks as the world seemed to still around her. The name in Sarah's message, Maple Street Community Center, felt like an echo from another lifetime, something deep in her memory stirring with recognition, though she couldn't yet place why. Without hesitation, she replied, "Send them $50,000 immediately. Whatever they need to stay open, make it happen. And, Sarah, I want to visit them today." It was an instinctive response, born of compassion and urgency, but Caitlin could not have known that this act of generosity would reopen a forgotten door to her own past, revealing that the very place she was about to save had once quietly saved her. Later that morning, she arrived at the modest red brick building, its sign faded but steadfast. Community Food Pantry, all are welcome. The scent of freshly baked bread and donated produce mingled with the chatter of volunteers and the laughter of children playing near the reading corner. Margaret Thompson, the 70-year-old director whose hands shook with gratitude, greeted her at the door. "Miss Clark, I can't believe you're here. Your donation saved us. We were days from shutting down." As Margaret led her through the pantry's small yet bustling rooms, Caitlin was struck by an almost haunting familiarity. The smell of industrial carpet, the warm light spilling across the tables, even the soft rhythm of canned goods being stacked. It felt like walking through the corridors of a half-remembered dream. When they reached a wall covered in photographs documenting decades of service, Caitlin's gaze caught on one particular image. There, in a faded frame from the early 2000s, was a young woman with tired but kind eyes holding the hand of a small girl clutching a basketball. The recognition hit her like a wave. That woman was her mother. That little girl was her. The world seemed to tilt as her heart thudded painfully against her ribs. "Mrs. Thompson," Caitlin whispered, voice trembling. "That photo, the woman and the girl, when was it taken?" Margaret squinted, adjusting her glasses. "Oh, that one? Around 2003 or 2004, I'd say. We used to take pictures during our Christmas drives. That little girl loved basketball. Her mother was a single mom, doing everything she could to get by." Caitlin felt tears sting her eyes as she reached for her phone, her hands shaking. When her mother answered, her voice warm and unsuspecting, Caitlin barely managed to speak. "Mom, I'm standing in the Maple Street Food Pantry, and there's a photo of us here from when I was a kid. Why didn't you ever tell me we came here?" Silence filled the line, long, heavy, aching, before her mother finally replied, voice thick with tears. "Oh, honey, I was hoping you wouldn't remember. Those were hard times. I didn't want you to feel the weight of it." Her words dissolved into quiet sobs as she continued, explaining that there had been weeks when she couldn't afford groceries, when she worked 2 jobs but still came home with an empty fridge, and that it was this very pantry that had kept them from going hungry. "I wanted you to grow up believing we had enough, that you could dream without worry," and whispered. Caitlin's throat tightened as tears spilled freely down her cheeks. The building around her seemed to be blur, every shelf, every volunteer, every smiling face merging into the realization that her success had unknowingly come full circle, that she had given life back to the very place that had given her hope as a child. She found herself sitting quietly on a wooden bench by the pantry entrance, the hum of activity fading into the background. Her mother's voice still echoed in her ears. "You were always meant to shine, sweetheart. Maybe now you know why." Later that afternoon, Margaret brought her a small box of keepsakes from the early days of the center. Old photos, letters, and thank you notes from families who'd found refuge there. One handwritten note caught Caitlin's eye. The handwriting was her mother's. "Thank you for helping me feed my daughter. Someday, she'll do something good for this world." The date at the bottom read December 2003. For a long moment, Caitlin couldn't breathe. The prophecy her mother had unknowingly written had come true in ways neither of them could have imagined. When she finally returned home that evening, she sat with her mother at the kitchen table, the same one they'd eaten around all those years ago, now covered in trophies, press clippings, and letters of gratitude from the children her foundation had helped. "Mom," she said softly, "I think maybe everything I've done, every shot, every game, every late night, it was leading me back to this." Her mother reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Sometimes life has a way of bringing us back to where kindness first touched us. In the weeks that followed, Caitlin transformed her discovery into action. She launched the Maple Street Renewal Project, funding an expansion of the pantry into a full community center offering food assistance, job training, childcare, and nutrition education. She made weekly visits, serving meals quietly, often without cameras, remembering the small girl she once was, the one who had learned to dribble a ball between queues of waiting families. Local residents began calling her visits the homecoming of gratitude, a phrase that spread across social media but meant something deeper to Caitlin than any headline. Standing before the refurbished center at its reopening, she said simply, "This isn't charity. It's returning a blessing that was once given to me." Behind her, the photo of that young girl and her mother was displayed proudly on the wall, a permanent reminder that every act of kindness carries within it the seeds of tomorrow's miracles. As the crowd applauded and children laughed nearby, Caitlin looked up at the sky, the same Iowa blue that had watched her grow, and whispered, "Thank you," because now she understood that the greatest victories aren't the ones earned under bright lights, but the quiet ones that honor where you came from, the kind that close a circle not with applause, but
and when we're not, and when we're not consistent on that end, we struggle, and I felt like we had it in moments throughout the course of the game, but enough.
Caitlin's mother's voice trembled with memory as she spoke through the phone, the truth spilling out after 2 decades of silence. "You were so young, and I was so ashamed," she said softly. "Your father had been laid off. I was working 2 part-time jobs that barely covered rent, and there were weeks when we just didn't have enough money for groceries." Caitlin sank into a nearby chair, the revelation wrapping around her like an invisible weight, both humbling and healing. "Mom, how long did we come here?" she whispered. "About 6 months," Anne replied gently. "Mrs. Thompson and the volunteers, they were angels. They never made us feel ashamed or different. They treated us with dignity, with kindness. You loved coming here because they had a small play area where you could dribble your basketball while I shopped." As Caitlin listened, the pieces of her childhood began to rearrange themselves, forming a truth she'd never recognized. That the community center where she had first learned to dream, to believe in herself, was the same place that had once fed her family when they had nothing. When she looked up at Margaret Thompson, the elderly director who had welcomed her so warmly, emotion welled up in her throat. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, her voice breaking and yet filled with purpose. "That little girl in the photograph, the one with the basketball, that was me." The older woman froze for a moment, and then her face softened into recognition. "Oh my goodness, little Caitlin, I remember you now. You never went anywhere without that basketball. Your mother was such a lovely woman, working so hard to provide for you." The embrace that followed transcended time itself. Margaret holding Caitlin as though she were still that small girl who had once clung to hope more tightly than her basketball. "You know what this means, don't you?" Caitlin murmured as she pulled away, her eyes glistening. "It means everything I've achieved started right here. This place didn't just feed my body, it fed my dreams." Determined to repay that unseen debt, Caitlin launched a mission over the following weeks that transformed the humble food pantry into something extraordinary. She established the Full Circle Fund, a permanent endowment ensuring that no family would ever again face closure or hunger as hers once had. She created scholarship programs for children whose families used the pantry, knowing education was the true escape from poverty, and built the Dream Corner, a vibrant play and study space stocked with books, art supplies, and of course, basketballs for children waiting while their parents shopped. The grand reopening drew crowds, cameras, and applause, but for Caitlin, the most sacred moment came when she stood in the very spot where her childhood photograph had been taken 20 years earlier. 2 decades ago, I stood here as a little girl who didn't understand why we were here, but I felt love, she told the crowd. Today I stand here as someone who understands that success isn't about how high you climb, but how far you reach back to lift others with you. This place taught me that